Well, joining us now from London is Labour member of the British Parliament, Tom Watson. Tom Watson, welcome to the programme.
Hello.
I understand that just in the last hour or so, you've in fact asked Rupert Murdoch, James Murdoch, Rebekah Brooks, all three, to appear before a parliamentary media committee. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Do you have any power to force them to appear?
Well, we've invited them next Tuesday. We'll be waiting for them to attend. Their company has misled Parliament and betrayed their readers. They've left the UK in a fury, so I think they've got a lot of questions to answer, and they should do the decent thing and turn up.
In fact, you say James Murdoch should be suspended from office while police investigate. Specifically on what evidence do you base that assertion?
James Murdoch authorised payments to a guy who ran our football association, Gordon Taylor. It was an astronomical sum, and it came with a confidentiality clause. Essentially, he bought the silence of a man who had suffered a criminal wrongdoing by the company. I think that that's wrong, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And his chief executive, Rebekah Brooks, admitted to a parliamentary inquiry in 2004 that the company had paid police for information. She's got questions to answer as well, which is why we want her there. And then Rupert Murdoch, he may be one of the most powerful media oligarchs on the planet, but people working for him hacked the phone of an abducted 13-year-old girl, and I think he owes their parents an apology.
Do you think that this goes all the way to the top? Do you believe Rupert Murdoch knew what was happening?
We don't know yet. He must have known that there was a toxic culture in the newsrooms of at least one of his papers. He knew that his papers ran a very aggressive, pugnacious operation, but they've tried to cover up. The company were criticised this morning by John Yates at a committee for basically helping to thwart the police investigation and misleading the original inquiry. So we're involved in what is essentially the investigation of a cover-up now, and Rupert Murdoch will have to answer for that.
You talk about one of his papers. Of course, we now know that The Sun and the Sunday Times have been implicated. How far do you think this goes, and is there any reason to believe that it necessarily stops at the UK border?
Well, I mean, if I was a media regulator in any of the other countries, in your country or in the United States, I would be looking very closely what's happened on Rupert Murdoch's watch now. You know, I'd be very concerned about other media institutions, and I think a lot of editors have got a lot of soul-searching to do tonight.
Of course, one of the big issues has been political access. Rupert Murdoch is in London right now. Do you have any sense of who he's meeting, whether he is still getting access?
Well, the irony is that it used to be, until last week, politicians would queue around the corner to meet Rupert Murdoch. You can't find an MP in London who wants to meet him now, nor particularly admits to it. So the one good that is already coming out of this is that in the UK we were over-familiar with each other. The police, the politicians and newspaper proprietors just had an informal relationship that I think was unhealthy for our democracy, and we're beginning to straighten that out now.
I want to have a look at that relationship in a minute, but with this call for these three to appear before this media committee, which they may or may not do you believe that if they don't, can you still get to the bottom of this? How confident are you in the processes that have already been put in place?
There's a number of other inquiries going on, and I'm pretty certain now that we'll get to the truth. If they don't attend next Tuesday, though, having misled Parliament, then I think the nation will know that they're just cowards and they have an obligation to come and explain themselves.
You've talked about politicians being terrified into silence, but clearly you haven't been. You started your battle to get the truth in 2006. Why? What prompted your interest?
Oh, I ended up... I had a particularly bad time with the company. There were lots of things going on, and I actually retired. I stood down as a minister to have a quiet life and got elected to our Arts and Media Committee. And 2 days later, the phone hacking scandal broke and we were duty-bound to do the inquiry. So I inherited responsibility for this inquiry and have spent 2 years trying to get to the facts. And now, finally, we're beginning to realise the depth of the criminality that took place. But
it also dates back, doesn't it, to when you signed a letter demanding Tony Blair leave office?
Yes, I resigned in September 2006, asking for Tony Blair to stand down as the leader of my party. And at that time, a News International journalist told me that Rebecca Brooks would pursue me for the rest of my life. And from that point on, all the newspapers were fairly hostile to me.
It seems that both sides of politics, if we're looking at the relationship between politicians and the media, both sides are equally culpable.
Oh, I think so. Ultimately, in the UK, I think we've had a failure of political leadership. We cozied up to Rupert Murdoch for short-term political gain, and that was at the expense of our long-term health of our democracy. There's been a big wake-up call for senior politicians now, and I think we're recalibrating that relationship. And perhaps there's lessons for politicians all over the world on that. If you have too much power in the hands of big media owners, then these kind of things, you have to guard against these kind of things. It
seems extraordinary, though, how far it went. In the latest reports, and this one is from the chief political commentator with the Daily Telegraph in London, Peter Oborne, he writes that, "I can even disclose that before the last election, Tony Blair rang Gordon Brown to try to persuade the Labour Prime Minister to stop the Labour MP Tom Watson," of course that's you, "raising the issue of phone hacking." Yeah. Did Gordon Brown try to warn you off?
I don't know. Well, he didn't try and warn me off. I don't know, but I suspect that Gordon Brown would know that he wouldn't have been able to stop me if he tried. And I can't confirm that story. I have been told by senior party workers that Rupert Murdoch phoned Tony Blair to phone Gordon Brown, but I'm afraid I can't verify that.
But it does seem extraordinary, particularly with what we're now learning, that Gordon Brown was himself a target.
Yes, in fact, the revelations that are really only breaking in the UK in the last day about Gordon Brown, I think are shocking and deeply sad for him and his family. He's had to carry a heavy load personally and politically in the last few years, and I feel very sorry for him.
Does it go past the politicians as well, though? Because Gordon Brown has said that when he was Prime Minister, he wanted to set up a judicial inquiry, but senior officials blocked the plan. I mean, is this coziness actually entrenched in the bureaucracy as well?
Yes, I think so. Sir Gus O'Donnell, the head of the civil service in the United Kingdom, resisted requests from Gordon Brown to conduct a judicial inquiry. And the police resisted it as well at the Home Office. They said they didn't want to be directed by politicians to do this. There was an election looming, and I think the civil service played it into the long grass.
Where do you think this is going to end? I mean, obviously, Rupert Murdoch has a lot of assets in the UK. I'll ask you about BSkyB in a moment, but just looking at what he's got at the moment, where do you think it's going to end?
Well, I think what we realise is that the Press Complaints Commission over here, our regulator, is basically hopeless. So I think it will spell the end of the PCC. We'll create our own. We need to create a self-regulatory framework that works, that will give independent representation and can oblige editors to put matters right when they've conducted wrongdoing.
So in essence, News International can survive in its current structure without News of the World?
Well, they're the most damaged brand in Britain right now, so I don't know. And the problem we've got is their senior executives. Nobody at the top is accepting responsibility for what went on. So I think it's damaging the other brands. And there's already consumer boycotts of the Sun newspaper that are scaling up in the country. So, I mean, at the moment, it's a company in freefall. They don't appear to have just accepted that the world has changed for them. They weren't used to being held account to their readers and by Parliament. So the jury is out on that. But there's definitely, you know, their commercial model is being threatened, I would say.
Can you see any way down the track that they'll get full control of BSkyB?
Well, I don't think they should. I think the one thing we've realised from this is the reason politicians would not stand up to Rupert Murdoch and the police wouldn't conduct vigorous inquiries is this was a media organisation that had too much power. And the old maxim that absolute power corrupts absolutely is perhaps what should be applied here. So I think we're going to, in slower time, policymakers will be talking about, well, you know, did he just own too much of the media landscape in the UK? And we might reach the conclusion we've got to change the law to put that matter right.
We'll talk about brand damage. What about David Cameron? Of course, he's on the other side of politics to you, but given that all parties have really been part of this, does this damage David Cameron? Does his relationship with Andy Coulson change the game?
Well, former Prime Ministers carry the can for their relationship with Rupert Murdoch as well, but I think David Cameron is in particular trouble because he appointed a former editor of the News of the World as his director of communications, and it appears that he was warned about his relationship with members of the criminal underworld, and so there's sort of all sorts of detailed questions that he's yet to answer, but that again will be dealt with by Parliament in slower time, I suspect.
Tom Watson, many thanks for joining us, and certainly you're living in very interesting times.
Thank you.